Okay, we're on live. No viewers yet, but
Okay. Well, I'm just
any-
typing a tweet that says we're recording it. Okay, hang on.
yeah, I have no idea if anybody's going to pop in. I just thought it would be an interesting experiment. Oh, we have a viewer.
My goodness.
One viewer. Hi.
One viewer. Howdy. So I just tweet. So if you have a question, ask it on the hashtag, right?
Right. Yeah, I'll mention that a couple of times. The hashtag is FIR139 on Twitter. Ask a question. And for our one viewer, we haven't really started recording the podcast yet. We've just activated the Hangout. So the whole idea here is see how the sausage is made.
Yeah. So I'm just tweeting
just to use an old cliche.
Yeah. Okay. Tweeted.
2 viewers.
Right. We might get a handful.
You never know.
Yeah.
We only get about a dozen for Circle of Fellows. You know, most of the people who watch or listen catch the recording, but
yeah, I think that's what most people tend to do these days. Yeah. So video is different to audio, as we know, but that's certainly what I do. There's not usually time to watch a live one, but the beauty of recording, as we well know, is you can pause it and come back to it and do it in your own time, basically. So that's what I tend to do a lot. Yeah,
indeed.
Unless we were doing something that's breaking news, we should have done that. We should have said, "Hey, breaking news constantly on this edition." We really got lots.
Anyway, yeah, well, so, you know, these days that's not necessarily an unreasonable expectation. There's probably going to be 2 or 3 stories break while we're recording the show. So,
yep, that'll be good.
Yeah. So you want to run through it?
I think we ought to.
Okay, so I've got a number of things to cover in the intro. First of all, the fact that we are live, just to explain what's going on to people who are listening to the recording, especially if we get questions. Then we'll do our usual little chat about what's going on.
Yep.
I want to mention that next week Dan York is hosting the show because I will be in Montreal for the IABC conference.
Right.
And then introducing the Media Intelligence Minute. And then we jump into the first story. I don't know if you've been listening to the show. Dan's been talking about GDPR in his report. So
yeah, Dan's been wrapped with GDPR.
Yeah,
it's been. Quite
I imagine he's been dealing with it at work too, huh?
Well, exactly, and so he's a good example of what many businesses have been confronted with in recent weeks. I've been looking at it myself for my little blog. It's got stuff up there about data. So anyway, so that's a topic to talk about because GDPR came into force yesterday on Friday. It's Saturday today, we're recording this. So May 25th is GDPR Day. It's interesting observing what's been going on, as I'm sure you might have found it interesting, or not, as the case might be. But I'm going to highlight a couple of things that occurred to me, and I know you've got a couple of things you're going to add to it as well. So it's a good thing to talk about. It's a very timely topic.
Yeah, considering it went into effect yesterday.
Exactly.
And the lawsuits were pretty quick to follow that.
Yeah, I mean, I saw these 2 guys have filed 8.8 billion lawsuits against Facebook and Google. Good luck with that. It's a symbol, but I wonder actually, and this actually will save this for the. We'll save this for the topic to Shel. Otherwise, we'll end up talking about this for 5 minutes. So, but it could be the tip of an iceberg. Anyway, we'll talk about that in the segment.
Right. Hang on one second. I'm just getting my recording software set up.
I see Sally has tweeted about the fact people can watch us live. Thank you, Sally, with a video clip. So,
ooh, okay.
That's cool.
All right, so then I'm going to do this piece on the fact that BuzzFeed is experimenting with live streaming on Twitch. Because their viewership has been falling off on Facebook Live, which is interesting. I think all of this distraction with data and Cambridge Analytica and all has just taken Facebook's eye off the live streaming ball. And
so We could talk about Facebook a bit, actually. I'm thinking of Mark Zuckerberg's appearance before the European Parliament parliamentarians.
Yeah, the only thing I read was that it was a great waste of time. I didn't hear anything.
It was utterly revoltingly terrible, frankly. I mean, he has no respect for politicians. That's one thing that occurred to me. So we can talk about that.
Okay. So we'll get through the Twitch thing and then talk about that.
Exactly.
Then we'll do a time code for the Igloo promo.
Yep.
Yeah, that's something that the people who are watching us live don't have to listen to any promo spots.
No,
just,
they don't.
Just hear me say that I'm making a time code so I can add it later.
Yeah.
AI and PR. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Well, this is a report that the CIPR, the trade body in the UK, published early last week, written by or produced by Jean Valin, who's a person that we both know well in the PR profession in Canada. And it's actually most interesting. It's a culmination of a lot of work that this AI panel has been doing over the past 12 months, a bit less than that actually, but extremely timely. So this is like inserting this into the public conversation. And will it make any difference to what PR folks do? That's a big question, but there's some big drivers of it, notably in the UK, Stephen Waddington, who's actually very strong on this, has been. So it's an interesting thing. It's not a huge document, and a lot of it is big graphics, a bit like Brian Solis's wheel graphic. I mean, lots of segments, so we can't really talk about that in any detail. But it's a summary of what it is and why we should care about this thing. So I think that's the topic to talk about, really.
That's good. Yeah, I have one or two quick items to add to that. After you finish the report, we start chatting about it. So one is Marcel. You've been reading about Marcel at all? This is the Publicis AI.
No.
Okay. Yeah, interesting stuff. I was always happy to see Wads quoted. So
yeah,
is he still with Ketchum?
He is. Yeah, he's quite senior guy there.
Right, I thought so. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So after that, we'll make a time code for Dan. I assume I'm getting Dan and Jen's reports tomorrow as usual. Last
I saw of Dan yesterday was he was on a video call we did. He was in a car heading to Burlington, Vermont.
Right.
So
moving,
presumably he's arrived there and will have recorded it, I would think. Yeah.
He records anywhere.
He does. He does.
He doesn't miss an episode, even if he has to record from airport terminal. So, okay. So then, let's see, Google and podcasts. This is interesting that the publishers who produce podcasts, Slate, New York Times, are starting to put some pressure on Google to live up to the promise they made about having a native podcast app and make discovery of podcasts easier on Google searches, not just on Android. I tested what they say you can do on Android, and it works. I did a search for the FIR podcast, and it not only pulled up the network, but let you play snippets from the most recent episodes on the. So,
I've done the same too on my phone. It's very, very cool, I must admit.
Yeah, but only on Android, not on desktop, not on iPhone. So so that's kind of interesting. What could happen to podcasting and the desirability of podcasting for brands if suddenly Google is in the game? I mean, there's so many more Android phones out there than iPhones that if people started listening. So anyway, I thought that was a interesting piece. Then Google versus Facebook on personal data. That New York Times story was interesting.
It was very interesting, and it's kind of what stimulated me to think about this, because compare that to Facebook. It's stark, the comparison. What Google lets you have and how it explains what it all is compared to Facebook. It's like, spotlight and utter darkness, the comparison between the two. So I've downloaded mine, humongous file, 75 gigabytes worth of data. So I'll talk a little bit about that. I had hoped to have extracted the various zips and taken a look at it before we got together today, but I've not had time to do that. So I don't know what's in there other than what Google tells me is in there. And it's a lot of stuff, I tell you. And it just amazes me that I understand even just Google's emails and the website you go to with the special URL that helps you understand what it all is. I look at that and I think, wow, compared to this Facebook, it's completely obscure. You have no clue, and even with what they're saying, it's a drip. That's it. So there's a stark difference between the two. But the journalist Brian Chen, who wrote the New York Times piece, it's a really well written piece, I must admit. So I'll make some references to some of the stuff he's saying in there as well. But I've not seen many people talking about this, so I guess not many folks have done this yet. But imagine, if I got 75 gigs worth, I tend to be promiscuous across social networks that Google runs. There's a lot of stuff in there going back. But I'm wondering, have they got everything? Because I noticed that it includes stuff from Blogger, and I was on Blogger in 2002, beg your pardon. So is all that stuff in there? I guess it must be. I'll find out when I get to it.
I wish I could remember if it was Twitter or Amazon, but I was reading somebody downloaded their data from one of those services and was surprised at the volume of information that they had collected.
Yeah.
So. All right. Break for the Social Chorus promo at that point. And then the last story is a survey of Gen Z. And I'll tell you what I find interesting here, because I've been talking about the values-driven marketplace and the need for brands and companies to step out of the shadows and take stake positions on social issues and political issues. Not everyone, the ones related to their business and their values. And the fact that there's a growing expectation for this. But what we're seeing with the Gen Zers is this is how they expect to participate in the debates. They're not that interested in voting or attending political rallies or calling their representatives. They pretty much think that politics and politicians have failed, and now it's up to companies and brands, and they're exercising their vote that way. So it's not just an expectation like we have with millennials that companies are going to do this stuff. It's actually how they're activating their political voice, is through both the expectation the companies will do this and their either support or withdrawal of support from those organizations. So it's interesting. It's also interesting that they will represent 40% of the consumer base by the year after next.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
I agree with you. Yeah.
Bigger group than millennials or boomers.
Yeah. I mean, it reminded me, I wrote a piece about millennials on my blog back in April last year, which has turned out to be the second most visited page ever, according to Google Analytics on my site. But that was contrasting the difference between Gen Z and millennials. And what prompted it was reports I'd read at the time where people were still saying, millennials are the big deal. Wait a minute, their time is past in the sense of entering the workplace. They've been in the workplace for years already. It's the Gen
Mark Zuckerberg's a millennial, right?
Right. It's the Gen Zs who are entering the workplace. So this was what prompted what I wrote, but it enabled me to look at the differences between the two. And there was some useful research at that time that highlighted those differences. And yet I still see today, a year later, people talking about millennials are the up and coming generation. You need to get up to date with this stuff.
Yeah.
Their time was 3 to 5 years ago in this context. So
yeah, they're pretty entrenched in the workplace at this point.
They are.
Yeah. Except for the ones who are going to grad school for the rest of their lives.
So, yeah. Okay. So
So after that is just the outro. So if you have something to pitch,
the usual.
Well, it's a good thing to pitch. That's all right.
Yeah.
All right. So you ready to record too?
Yeah, I've got the audio recorder lined up.
Okay.
I suppose I should mention one thing just for the benefit of the video viewers, in case they're wondering why I've got a green screen in my background. Because if you look at me, you'll see a green screen. And the reason for that is that this is a fixture in my home office that I use on a video conferencing service called Zoom. That is the best I've ever used of any.
It is awesome.
WebEx, forget GoToMeeting, forget any of those things. This is truly extraordinary. One of the features it has, if you have a webcam that supports it, I hasten to add, is enabling you to insert virtual backgrounds into it. All you need is a green screen. I happen to have a green screen, and it is seamless. Truly, it is seamless. I've got great great pictures, things ranging from a beach on Costa Rican beach on the Pacific coast, to on the flight deck of the Millennium Falcon as it's coming out of hyperspace, to an office building in Shanghai on the 50th floor, to a Tuscan village scene through my window. It's gorgeous. So I cycle through those things quite a bit. So anyway, Hangouts doesn't support it.
I wish I could remember the name of this thing. It was available for a couple of years, and I had a green screen
for
it. And it did that. And it was not bad this had to be 12 or 13 years ago. And then it was acquired by a company that produced much higher end and more sophisticated software, and they stopped supporting it. I couldn't use it anymore, but it was ahead of its time with that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, this I've got a Logitech webcam, and there's a new version of this webcam, a new model that has software with it that lets you do this on a variety of other web applications. But what's cool about it is that the camera now includes an infrared element that can sense depth of field. So, for instance, what happens typically if I'm doing this on Zoom, if I get out of my chair and come back again, it takes a few seconds for it to find me again in focus. And so you've got the background in rich, sharp detail of an HD image, and I'm blurred in the foreground. So that's one of the things about it. The depth isn't there. This new camera does that. But, I tell you, Shel, this new camera is 170 pounds, and I'm not spending that on a new camera just for this. So the tech will catch up with this, and this feature will be available, I'm sure, in services like Hangouts sometime. But in the meantime, if you want virtual dead easy with a green screen only, get Zoom.
Yeah. Oh, Zoom is great. We're using it at work. It is just better than anything that's out there.
I mean, I was on a call the other day that had 97 people on the call in around the world in different countries, and this thing just handled it without any problem whatsoever.
It just worked.
Yeah.
I did spend some money. I got a gimbal for my smartphone. So
what's a gimbal?
It's a stabilizer. So
I've seen those being advertised.
It has a couple of different positions, so it can it'll be fixed and stable, or it'll.
Do you do a lot of video with your phone?
I don't, but I'm going to.
Are you going to?
Yeah, in the process of finalizing the communication plan for the company. Worked with Ryan Williams on the audit, and we have all the results now. And I'm doing a dry run with my boss, who's the senior VP of HR, this coming Thursday before I present it to the executive committee when I get back from the IABC conference.
Cool.
But yeah, short, snappy videos is in the plan for mobile consumption, and I'm going to need to get better at, because all I do now is, the home movies that we used to do with the cheap little Kodak movie cameras, right? So
yeah, excellent.
I am not a videographer, but I have to become one.
Yeah, no, definitely. That's it. They're cool, those devices, I must say.
Yeah, very nice.
Okay.
Still learning how to use it, but yeah. Okay, well, if you're ready, I'm ready.
Yep.
Okay.
So do we want to do a multiple countdown and click at the same time?
Yeah, and you want to do the FIR 139? I do it three weeks out of the month, so
that's true.
Nice to have you do it.
So FIR 139. Yeah. Okay.
And the Hobson and Holtz report. So
yeah.
Okay. Ready? 3, 2, 1, go.
FIR 139, the Hobson and Holtz report for May 2018. This is Neville Hobson in Bracknell in England.
And this is Shel Holtz in Concord, California. Welcome, everybody, to episode 139 of For Immediate Release for Monday, May 28th, 2018. I hasten to add that we are recording on Saturday the 26th. So if some major news related to communication breaks between Monday and today, you'll know why we didn't talk about it. This is also, as Neville said, the Hobson and Holtz report for May, and we are live. First time we've ever done this. We're allowing people to watch us record, and we have 2 people viewing, which is great. Hi,
hello,
viewers. More may join or not over the course of probably the next hour and a half. And if you are watching live, we invite you as we go along to ask questions or share observations. You do that on Twitter using the hashtag FIR139. I am monitoring this. I use a service called Twubs that I have been using for years. twubs.com, that allows you to monitor a hashtag. So it's a terrific little service, and I know it gets used a lot on tweet chats.
Yeah,
works really well. And so if you ask a question or raise an issue, I'll see it pop right up, and we can address it. Could be a fun new component of this show if we ever do this again. See how it goes. So how you been, Neville? It's been a month.
it has a busy month, Shel, a busy month, just like you. It's wrapped up from where I work, from my work with the Internet Society, a lot to do with, particularly in the past few weeks, on online privacy, issues surrounding internet governance. That my job is to help with the storytelling of that online via social channels in particular, and it's a fascinating aspect, I believe. What's interesting is helping communicate that in ways that different types of groups of people can understand. So the policy wonks, they need real technical stuff, relatively speaking, and for the rest of us, we need it in ways we can understand it. So a lot of that, it takes up my time. So auditing, stuff like that, love it. It's great. It's great fun. But not time for much else.
Does it get good engagement? The content from the Internet Society telling these stories?
Depends what you mean by engagement. In terms of consumption of the content and talking about it, yeah, quite a bit. So, but part of what I'm doing at the moment is building out a long-term strategic approach to using social media. So hence, we've just completed a social media audit that will inform the development of that. And it's terrific seeing some of that. No massive surprises in the audit results, but when you're auditing social channels that are used to communicate global messages as well as local messages, there's a lot of complexity in there in terms of understanding your audiences. So we've got that data now, and we're currently just going through all of that stuff. So fascinating stuff. I mean, this is really the kind of stuff that you have to have if you're to make sensible decisions of what you're doing. So getting cracking with that.
Right. And on a much smaller scale, we've wrapped up the communications audit at WebCore, the company where I work, and developing the strategic plan. Be presenting that in the next few weeks. Speaking of the next few weeks, I leave a week from yesterday, Friday, June 1st, for Montreal for the IABC World Conference. And Dan York has graciously agreed to host FIR for next week, episode 140. In fact, I gave him enough advance notice that he says he's going to be able to pull in some guest co-hosts, and looking forward to seeing what he does. But next week's show, you'll have Dan sitting at the mic. And with that, I think we're through our intro, other than hearing from Jen Phillips with Karma's Media Intelligence Minute. And for the two of you watching, this is what we do. We stop and make time code notes.
So we see one of the two is Sally Getch, who's popped up on the hashtag to say, "I'm one of the two watching."
Oh, hello, hey, Sally. Yeah, we're Sally and Stefan and Michelle and I are continuing to try to work out a date to get together. Okay. When you're ready to jump into the GDPR story,
right,
go for it.
So May the 25th, that was yesterday as we're recording this, was a milestone date for lots of us, but particularly in the European Union, which relates to GDPR, an acronym that many people have reacted with horror to increasingly as we led up to this. But the General Data Protection Regulation, to give it this mouthful full name, became effective yesterday. It's an extension of European Union law that is part of the complexity in helping people understand what it means to you if you're not in the European Union. But briefly, in case folks listening don't know what it is, let me try and explain what it is very, very briefly. It relates to how you deal with the personal data of individuals who are citizens of a European Union state. So it's not about where you are as a business or anyone who, for instance, offers services or even products for that matter from your website where you sell things online, or whether you have a newsletter people sign up to, whether you have a blog that people leave comments on, in which case they enter their name and their email address and maybe some other personally identifiable data. It's to do with the individual about whom the data is concerned, and that individual, if he or she lives in a European Union country, then GDPR applies to you. wherever you happen to be. You could be in Venezuela, you could be in Laos, you could be in northern Canada, doesn't matter. It applies to you. So the regulation actually went into force 2 years ago. It's a grace period of 2 years for organizations to prepare themselves to get ready for it. As we've talked about on this show on and off in recent months, Shel, that's been a wonder, actually. Are people ready for this? And there's been some, as we've increasingly got up to the day, horror stories emerging about people are not. Does it mean the world is going to collapse all of a sudden? There's been a sense of millennium bug about all of this, I have to tell you.
Y2K.
Yeah, it hasn't. That didn't happen, of course. But I have to say, one of the best comments I saw about it was a tweet from Martin Shovel, who is a speechwriter and a cartoonist, someone I've been a follower of for quite a long time. I love his cartoons. He didn't do a cartoon for this one. It's just a text. I thought this summed it up quite well. He says, and he posted this late afternoon on GDPR Day, he says, sadly, GDPR is to the end of spam what the millennium bug was to the end of the world. And of course, that relates to the flurry of floods, in some cases, of emails that people have been getting in the past week, asking you for permission to do certain things. And that's itself caused lots of confusion with some people with some knowledge of how all this works, saying people don't need to do that in many cases. Others saying even more strongly, some of what they're doing with these emails is actually breaking the rules of GDPR, and they'll find themselves liable for it. A lot of confusion. FUD, in other words, huge amounts. But it has been a factor, and I'm a small example in a sense that my inbox has been getting upwards of 15 to 20 emails per day this week from organizations that at some time or another over the past decade I signed up for, many of whom I don't even remember ever doing that. I've actually looked at it in one sense as a great way to clean out who you subscribe to. Just don't reply to any of it and you won't get any more email again. I'm not sure it's going to be that simple, but it also serves to highlight the ones you do want to hear from, and those I have noted are probably half a dozen. So it's in force. And what does it actually mean to businesses? Does it mean that if you infringe the rules, you're going to suddenly be hammered by regulators and penalized with huge penalties? And the penalties are severe. I mean, they truly are. They're talking about 4% of your annual revenue as a fine. And if you're a global business, so think of this lawsuit against Facebook, for instance, because they're citing GDPR infringement. 4% of their annual revenue, that's got to be running into the hundreds of millions, if not billions even. So it doesn't mean that, of course. Does it mean a small business who hasn't got all the elements in place yet is suddenly going to find themselves in deep trouble? It doesn't mean that at all, certainly not in the UK. The Information Commissioner's Office has been quite active, indeed very proactive in communicating a lot of this information. They set up a special Twitter handle called Your Data Matters, which helps explain what it means if you're a small to medium business, in fact, a small business in particular. So it's quite interesting, all of that going on, but it has highlighted that many people aren't ready, including some pretty big organizations. So I think it's wait and see what happens in that regard. The Information Commissioner's Office, in fact, their advisory on Friday was don't lose any sleep over this. If you're on the way to becoming compliant with the regulations, and there's a huge lot of them. If you've done things like updated your privacy policy, if you've made it clear on your website that the reason you're asking permission to use data is this and this and this, and how long you're going to keep it for, what you're going to do with it, what you're going to safeguard with it, you should be fine because you're showing that you are becoming compliant with it. Those are the bare minimum things you should do. If your website runs WordPress, boy, have you got a lot of help at hand. WordPress issued a big update this past week, a lot of which was to do with tools that will help you make your website or blog or whatever it might be compliant with much of that regulation. So help to create a privacy policy, help to explain elements of it properly that you can tailor and edit yourself, adding fields to comment forms that ask people's consent. They've got to check a box saying, yes, by filling out this form and giving my data, I give you permission, things like that. And even if you've got a site that people can log into and run their own blogs, for instance, or if it's an e-commerce site, then you give people the option to request their data And that's something I know has worried a lot of people. But if you automate this, and this tool, some of these tools let you do that, you are on the way to being able to sleep at night and not worry too much about any of this stuff. But one interesting thing I did find, Shel, thinking about this, GDPR isn't about just websites and mailing lists and commenting forms, all that kind of stuff. It's about a whole ton of personally identifiable data in an organization of any type. And the ICO, the Information Commission Office of the UK, gives some interesting examples of the kind of thing that you as an individual might want to request of an organization. So for instance, they talk about you're an individual and you can ask your employer for a copy of your personnel file. Under GDPR, they have to give it to you, and that's interesting to me. That it's outside this is outside the traditional realms of how you get access to employee data as an employee in an organization. So you might want to get a record in a company of emails between one individual and another, between two dates, and for instance, you can ask for that from a company. They have to provide it to you if you know that those emails were done by people who are employees of that company, for instance. You might want to ask for data from a closed circuit TV camera, CCTV as it's known, that you say it's at this location on that date from this time to that time. And you can ask for a copy of the data, and the people, it could be a council or a city administration, has to provide it to you under the terms of the GDPR. You have to provide lots of information in terms of your request. So there's a lot of information on the Information Commission's website explaining this aspect of it. I've not seen anyone referencing this at all anywhere until I saw this. So it goes way beyond just your data on a website in a business sense. It is personal data related to you in any form that someone may hold about you that if you didn't know even. So if you do know they have it, now you can request that. You might not have been able to do that before. So it's a situation that people cannot avoid. I've seen quite a few in the PR community and other communication professions talking about this, but not really in any differentiating way than others are talking about it, how you need to be compliant with it. So the date has happened. Many people are ready, even to the extent where if you're a large enterprise, you have to do things like have a data protection officer, a named individual who is the responsible person in your organization for putting in place all of this. And you've got to make it easy to contact that individual. So all of that, for some organizations, is in place. For others, it's not yet. Small businesses, which is many of us are in that area. Indeed, as individuals, if you have data, you still have to comply with this. So there is help to do this. The Information Commission Office in the UK and the equivalents around the European Union have got rafts of information that help you. And I imagine in other countries it's the same. Talking anecdotally to acquaintances and friends in the US, I hear mixed stories as to what's available over there, but generally it's quite good. There's also another reality which I could see happening, and I'm not sure what the answer to this one's going to be, but things like some services that have been around for a long time, as there's one or two I've subscribed to, suddenly have shut down literally abruptly because they say we can't comply with this, therefore we're not doing business in the EU anymore. That's kind of eyebrow raising to me. You've had situations yesterday of quite a large number of US-based mainstream media properties, newspapers in particular, that have suddenly not been accessible from people in the European Union, in Europe. Their IP address is recognized. They're not able to access the site. So they've got to sort that out. And those sorts of things, frankly, I think should be embarrassing to those organizations, because they just haven't got themselves ready in time to take care of that. That's what it looks like to me. So I mean, there's lots more I could talk about. There's a couple of interesting elements, but what's your take on it all, Shel? I mean, it's happened. What do you see it as?
Well, it's interesting because you compare this to Y2K, and when the clock ticked over to 12:01 a.m. on January 1st, 2000, it wouldn't have been adequate to say, oh, we have the intent to get all of this straightened out, because if the apocalypse had come, having the intent would have been woefully inadequate. And I'm still not convinced that there wouldn't have been lots of problems if all that money hadn't been spent and all that time invested in remediating systems to deal with it. I was kind of shaking my head back in 2000 when people were saying, "Oh, there was nothing to this." And I said, "Well, no, there was nothing to it because everybody fixed it." Right?
Yeah.
That was the whole point. But here it seems like having the intent is adequate in a lot of respects. I agree with you on a number of things. First, my inbox is flooded with notifications, and a lot of them are requests to confirm that you still want to get this email newsletter or this service. I did notice a story on, and it's interesting. You talked about the U.S. newspapers that are inaccessible. It's largely from two publishers. One is Trunk, which is huge, right? I mean, Trunk is the Chicago Tribune and the Los Angeles Times, the Baltimore Sun, the New York Daily News, the Orlando Sentinel. And what you see if you're in the EU when you go to one of those URLs is, unfortunately, our website is currently unavailable in most European countries. We are engaged on the issue and committed to looking at options that support our full range of digital efforts, digital offerings to the EU market. Another one is Lee Enterprises. They own 46 daily newspapers. And did they just wake up the other day and say, "Oh my God, what is this GDPR thing?" I mean, how long did they have to prepare, and how much revenue are they losing? How many readers are not going to come back because they weren't ready? The other thing that I find interesting is, as the clock ticked over to May 25th, Facebook and Google were hit with lawsuits accusing the company of coercing users into sharing personal data. They're looking for a $3.9 billion fine from Facebook and 3.7 billion, I should say euros, not dollars, for Google. This was an Austrian privacy activist named Max Schrems, who I imagine was staying up until midnight just so that he could push the button when midnight hit. But he claims their new policies don't go far enough, that they're basically forcing users into an all or nothing option that is not compliant in Schrems' point of view. Both Google and Facebook say they've spent a lot of time preparing for this, and they've been talking about it for a while, but interesting to see where these lawsuits shake out.
It's probably a tip of an iceberg, I wonder, Shel. Thinking about this, one can speculate, as I am, in looking at Zuckerberg recently testifying in front of parliamentarians in the European Parliament. A fiasco, frankly. I watched part of it, not all of it, I must admit. It was only 90 minutes. But two things about it. One is, to me, that I just kind of went, wow, the European politicians know way more than their American counterparts about how tech works, about social networks, behaviors of people and how they use social networks. What I saw there, contrasting with what I saw with Zuckerberg in front of the US Congress and Senate, that was a joke by comparison to this. But what turned this into a total joke was that they gave him all the questions up front. He could then cherry pick which ones he had, then they ran out of time. I mean, it was ridiculous, Frank, utterly ridiculous. But it did occur to me that a side effect of GDPR could be a benefit, depending on your point of view, is it gives the EU in particular some serious teeth to really go after Facebook. And so they ask questions. They might get ignored, but they've got the power now to say, okay, fine, you've got until so-and-so to do this, or we're going to fine you 4% of your global revenue. So is that likely? Well, there's people in the European Union who are chomping at the bit to do something like that.
What I've been wondering is if I need to do anything personally. My business is gone because I'm now a full-time employee. I haven't put out an issue of my weekly email newsletter in months because of the full-time job, but I still have people who are subscribing. I'm not selling anything anymore. I'm not pitching. I'm not using it as a marketing tool. Do I need to get people to say they want to subscribe?
You've got their data. You've got it somewhere. You've got their name, their email address, and whatever else you might have about them, maybe a physical address. You have to offer them the ability to request deletion of that anytime, or a copy of it even. And if you're running WordPress, there are plugins galore that help you do that. So you do. Actually, you do need to.
And it's not adequate that every issue of the newsletter tells you that you can unsubscribe right here.
No, that's not adequate. That's not adequate. You need something on the website. It's there's what's the best place to go look in your state in California? There must be Better Business Bureau is a good place to start, I would think.
Yeah, something to do in my copious free time.
Yeah, exactly. But you do need to do something, and so update your privacy and make reference to all of this. That's a good start point. I did that.
But I have the intent, so I'm okay, right?
There you exactly. So one thing I want to add to this, by the way, is just another element to this that perhaps isn't obvious to many of us. Maybe it is to me because it's in the business area I'm now working with the Internet Society. This is a blog post written by one of my colleagues, Konstantinos Kometis, who's the Director of Policy Development at the Internet Society, and that's to do with Internet governance, amongst other things. He wrote a good post that was published on GDPR Day, talking about what this might mean in terms of how this is applying to any organization around the world that collects personal data from anyone in the EU. He's saying Europe is setting itself up as the leading voice on internet privacy globally. The question is, he says, will Europe hold the limelight for long, or will other countries and regions step up their own efforts to tackle privacy in the context of a global internet? He talks a bit about extraterritoriality in the GDPR and the spillover impact on larger internet governance consideration, naming a few which I think are worth mentioning. Setting a precedent where countries could start imposing national or regional legislation that has global impact, like this, for instance. Creating unintended clashes between different laws, which can result in unpredictability and lack of clarity, which could subsequently impede the rollout of global technology. And the final one he mentions, producing regulatory competition, quote unquote, the notion of state actors seeking to command the international internet regulatory environment. How this will play out, we don't know yet, he says, but it's likely that this will have repercussions for the future of internet governance. And that's something that the mainstream thinking wouldn't address that. This is very much a policy area. But that is definitely, I think he's on the right track with that. This has implications for something like that as well. I think GDPR in itself is a major development in terms of a global tool such as the internet and everything that sits on top of it, including the World Wide Web. So all the websites, all the things we do, all the things we enjoy doing, ranging from sharing content to buying goods and services, wherever we are from, wherever anyone else is, suddenly this is a spotlight on it in terms of protecting people's data. One thing I've heard, and again, all this is anecdotally from things like watching people being interviewed on TV, small businesses. It was a great example of a couple of women here in the UK who run a business that's, I think if I recall, it was to do with selling bespoke handmade clothing that's in high demand, commands high prices, but it needs personal data of people to ship the orders to and engage with and all those kinds of things. They say it's cost them about £5,000 to become compliant and huge amounts of time. They did say, because this was what was in my mind when I heard this story, that they realized now that they were woefully non-compliant with existing data protection regulatory conditions before this came about, until they started doing this. So that's interesting that they realize that. So they're not complaining per se. And indeed, what they are saying is that they should have done a lot of this stuff over the years before, and they suddenly had to do all this, hence the £5,000 cost. Had to hire a consultant, they had to get someone to write this or write that, upgrade the software, do a whole ton of stuff. And so it's highlighting, I think, something that many of us collectively have not done before, and we should have done. And suddenly we're now confronted with something, we have to do this. And therefore that must be a good thing for those of us who have the data of others, including others who have our data, in which case I think this is a good thing overall.
Yeah, well, it was ever thus, right?
Yeah.
How many times have we seen industry opt not to self-regulate and then be forced to comply with onerous regulatory requirements? And I'm sure that other industries won't take a lesson from the GDPR.
I tell you,
history will repeat.
I'm just waiting to find out who's going to be the first one hit with a 4% fine on global revenue if it's a global company. Is it going to be one of the traditional global multinationals in some form? Is it going to be one of the new tech companies that have valuations of billions? Who's it going to be? It's going to be someone. And it's going to be a test case without any question. Does the EU have teeth for this? Is it something that is so egregious? And this is what they're saying. It's got to be something so serious to warrant that kind of, could it be Uber, for instance? I hear people talk about Uber. Is it going to be Facebook? I mean, maybe if Facebook Cambridge Analytica had happened later this year after this regulation come into force, I wonder what the reaction would have been.
Yep. Hey, before we move on to the next story, I just want to let you know that our other viewer right now is Clarence Jones.
Clarence, yeah.
Hey,
Clarence, how you doing?
Still from East Central Mississippi, I presume.
Yeah, he is.
Clarence has been a long-time listener and once upon a time a regular contributor.
Yeah,
so,
still there.
Yep. So let's move into our next story, which has to do with Twitch. For those who don't know Twitch, it is a live streaming service that for most of its existence has been focused on live streaming people playing video games. And I guess you have to be of a certain generation or seriously into video games to want to do that. I still have trouble conceiving the idea of sitting at my computer watching somebody else's video game as they're playing it. But it's shifting. Partly since it was acquired by Amazon. I believe that was $1 billion price tag that Amazon paid to get Twitch. And they're starting to bring in other kinds of content. And one of the more recent organizations to join Twitch has been BuzzFeed, specifically BuzzFeed News, although I also saw some cooking videos on Twitch from BuzzFeed. BuzzFeed was one of the success stories on Facebook Live. And for the better part of the last year and a half, 2 years, Facebook has been singularly focused on building up Facebook Live. They've got the Facebook Watch category when you go to Facebook, and they are really trying to become an alternative to TV programming so that there's always something on these various channels. And they've been doing very well. BuzzFeed News, one of the things that they have been doing there is reporting election results. So, for example, they had a significant number of people watching the results of the election in Alabama for Senate last year. And what is it here? It is 2.1 million live viewers for the Senate election watching those results. But since the start of this year, the viewership of BuzzFeed on Facebook Live has just been plummeting. And the article I read on this, which was on Digiday, did not speculate or ask anybody else why they thought those numbers were going. I think it's because Facebook has taken its eye off that ball with everything else that has been going on. I haven't been reading a lot from Facebook about Facebook Live, and I haven't been reading a lot about Facebook Live in the tech media either. So that viewership has fallen off, and they have decided over at BuzzFeed News to start experimenting with Twitch. And so far, so good. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that you would want to have the live streaming as opposed to watching something on, say, CNN or Fox or whatever TV news channel you may prefer, and that is that there's engagement going on. People who are watching can engage with each other. The network, in this case BuzzFeed, can engage directly with you. So they've done 4 of these in a big way. One has been a broadcast from the bottom of the sea, and I didn't get a chance to go take a look at what that was. The other 3 have been related to election results. In fact, this morning when I went to see what was streaming live on Twitch from BuzzFeed, it was people gathered around waiting for the results of the abortion referendum in Ireland. This is what they categorize as IRL. These are just people showing what's going on in real life as opposed to having, an anchor or a field reporter talking. It's just streaming what's happening in front of you. Cinema verite, I guess, in some regards. But 153,237 people were watching that when I took a look at it. Another interesting thing about Twitch versus Facebook is that you can schedule recorded content. And you can have the content that you broadcast live available for repeat, where on Facebook Live, everything is live. They are starting with 0 fans. It's an uphill climb, but discoverability on Twitch is more like YouTube than on Facebook. You can search as opposed to have to scroll through a news feed. So an organic audience can gain momentum over time. Twitch is doing its part to make people more aware that it is expanding beyond gaming. Neville, I think you'd like to know this if you didn't already, but they will be streaming a marathon of more than 500 episodes. That's 26 seasons of Doctor Who. And 500 episodes, that goes beyond the Christopher Eccleston, goes earlier.
Yeah. So you must be in seventh heaven with that idea.
Well, I only learned about it this morning, but yeah, I'll be going to find that a little bit later. See if we can find some of the earlier Doctors. But this IRL is one of the fastest growing categories on Twitch, where users just capture things that are going on in the world around them. Twitch has also signed on an organization that is going to support the live streaming of more than 31 poker tournaments in real time. Now, this doesn't mean that gaming is losing favor. It is still attracting most people. They had 31.9 million people watch other people play Fortnite between May 14th and May 20th. But, if there are companies out there who are embracing Tom Feremsky's notion that every company is a media company, and it makes sense to have a broadcast channel, and I could see this for certain types of consumer products. I could see a Pepsi or a Coca-Cola with a live broadcast channel. I can see Patagonia, for example, with an outdoor type channel. You might want to look at Twitch as an experiment. I think the risk is low because you're building an audience organically. You're not going to draw hundreds of thousand people right away because you can attract them from your Facebook page over to your Facebook Watch channel. Might be an interesting approach to take, but Twitch is becoming a force in both the live streaming and the recorded video world.
Yes, I mean, I've heard of Twitch. I've not paid any attention to this at all. So this is a most interesting report. I think the point you mentioned about being able to schedule recorded content and reruns of previously recorded content would be a big appeal. Given that you can't do that on Facebook Live, the clue's in the word live. So if you want to do that, that's not the channel for you. This is the channel for you. It is most interesting, particularly that example you mentioned of poker gaming, how they're going to stream live stuff like that. These kind of niche interest areas that attract huge numbers of people of interest. Suddenly you've got a medium that would appeal to many of those people. So something to keep an eye on, I think, definitely.
Okay, a time code note here for the first promo, which will be Igloo Software.
Yeah.
All righty, anytime you're ready.
Okay. So a phrase we constantly hear about, although it seems to have dropped off a bit recently, is artificial intelligence, AI. I think the excitement about the robots are coming to take over all our jobs and we're not going to have a future dying away as more sensible voices are talking now on the realities of what all of that is likely to mean in the workplace. Now comes the turn of public relations, and it's something I'm very pleased to see this development. When I was very actively involved in PR communications, going back a year or two now, AI was a strong area of interest to me to talk about that, and I was speaking a lot about it on events and internally with organizations I was working with at the time. So now comes this report that was published by the Chartered Institute of Public Relations in the UK, the CIPR, published new research that they say reveals the impact of AI in particular on public relations practice, predicting the impact on skills in the profession in the next 5 years. So it's very specific in the frame of reference. It was led by Jean Valin. Jean is someone we know. He is Canadian. He is to do with the Global Alliance and has been a credible voice for PR globally for many, many years. And he has led this comprehensive assessment of the impact of AI on PR skills. Conversation around this topic, says the CIPR, is typically polarized between denial and techno panic. I love those two phrases there, I must admit. So what Valin has done in this is do a benchmark against the Global Alliance Global Body of Knowledge. That's a GBOK framework, using a simplified version of it, which describes more than 50 capabilities in PR to visually represent the skills that AI is most likely to replace. Tools were benchmarked against the GBOK framework by an international group of practitioners, says the CIPR. It's most interesting, the report itself. It's heavy on charts and graphics that are difficult to talk about in a contextual way like this. You need to see them. The report is not very long. If I recall, it's 6 to 8 pages, I think. Worth reading, though, I have to say, because what the CIPR has done with this is kind of inserted into the public domain as a stimulus for conversation. It's the first time someone's done this in the PR context, and I think it's definitely worth looking at. It characterizes the impact of tech and AI on PR skills, as I mentioned. It found that 12% of a public relations practitioner's total skills out of 52, says the CIPR, could be complemented or replaced by AI today, with a prediction that this could climb to 38% within 5 years. Fundamental human traits such as empathy, trust, humor, and relationship building can't be automated, says the CIPR. I would insert an additional word to that, which is yet, because there will be some of this. And I've had many discussions with people on this. Some agree, some disagree most strongly. But you can never say never in the way tech is moving. So not yet can they do this, I would add. Technology is impacting practice in other areas of practice, including the simplification of tasks, listening and monitoring, and automation of tasks. Therefore, says the CIPR, another 27% of the practitioner's skill set benefits from the support of some technology to assist in decision making or deep analysis. So they say in 5 years there may be more assistance from AI tools which will contribute more directly to the application of skills in this category, but on balance human intervention is dominant. Now that, to me, is the most interesting element of what the CIPR is suggesting, because that is very much what I see and have seen for some years now. Hence, what I was calling AI as augmented intelligence, not artificial, meaning these are tools that augment you, that help you become more effective, because it does some of the grunt work that leads you to be able to make the right decisions, maybe more qualitatively, maybe more quickly, and certainly with more confidence that others can have in what you're saying to them. So this basically says this is what this does, but it's rich. The data set is very rich here. It has a great quote from Jean Valin. He says, AI is about to massively change our lives. The PR profession needs to keep up. We need more experience with these tools and more critical reviews to learn how best to use them and their limitations. Regardless of the tasks and skills that can be automated or benefit from AI, human intervention, editing, sensitivity, emotional intelligence, applying good judgment, and ethics will always be needed. He's absolutely right. But AI is in there in some form. So the yet word to me is more valid than ever in the context of that. And that's, to me, is where some of the discussion, a big part of the discussion about this will focus, is those areas that Jean Valin highlights there. Some agree, some disagree. I've had arguments with people about these things as well. But this is the reality of what we are confronting as communicators, not just in public relations. That AI, I mean, if you've seen those videos, I'm sure you have, Shel, of Boston Dynamics, those robotics. Right, the ones that can do backflips and climb stairs and open doors, all that kind of stuff. Creepy looking some of them are, but that tech is now, and the commercialization of that is possible. It's not there yet.
The dog, the four-legged dog that they've created, yes. I understand that's ready to go on sale.
Right. So it's coming. This is what we're confronted with in that context. Look at logistics and supply chain management. Look at warehouses, all those robots that move stuff around. So it isn't hard to imagine that could be within this time frame. I believe it would be that you will have a situation. I mean, it won't be necessarily a kind of a human-looking machine sitting next to you at a desk. It'll be something you engage with either on a screen or audibly. It'll be a voice that you talk to that you will help plan something or work through some analytics on data that you have done related to something. And this AI will help you. So I like to think of AIs in a personal sense. I talk about an AI because I know what that means, and most people do know what it means. I wish I had an AI, I often say, if only to myself, no one else. It's better than a clone, I think. Having an AI is probably better than a clone. So, but that's what we're moving towards, it seems to me. I don't believe this will be the pictures that are typically in the tabloids when they talk about robots are coming, this Terminator type thing or whatever. This will be something that lives in a device. Alexa is the great example of this. Even if she is sending your voice, your personal messages to contacts without your permission, it's not perfect tech. This is the whole thing. It's not perfect yet.
So it's new.
So this is great in the PR profession to have this debate. And the fact that they've done this now, I agree with Stephen Waddington. This is now the time for this.
Yeah, and you talk about that incident with the Amazon Echo that everybody's up in arms about, and I'm thinking it's one of those things that you wouldn't even think about until it happens.
Right.
For those who didn't hear, it was a couple that was having a discussion, and in the course of the discussion, somebody said something that sounded like the trigger word for Alexa, so it started listening, and then it heard something that it interpreted as a request to send what it had been listening to somebody in their contact list. And it even asked if, who do you want to send it to? And intuited from what was being said after that, who it wanted to go to. So somebody ended up getting that recording and saying, did you mean to send this to me? It's just not one of those things I can imagine the developers anticipated. But now that they know about it, they can fix it. And that's how it works with a lot of these new technologies. But AI in PR and in communications in general, sort of another dimension of that, not knowing what we can do with it or what it can do until we start playing with it and experimenting. You may remember Publicis, the advertising agency, pulled out of the Cannes Lion, was it last year or the year before, because they wanted to stop investing the money that they were spending on submitting to and attending that event into something they call Marcel. And Marcel is an AI just for Publicis. I'm going to read here because it just makes it easier to get this out. But Marcel will provide multiple ways each employee can contribute to ongoing projects or pitches. These individuals will either be found and recommended by the AI, or they will be able to pitch ideas. Marcel will also have access to employees' calendars and will be able to make recommendations that take the person's workload and availability into account alongside behavioral patterns, needs, desires, and experience. Publicis also promises its employees that Marcel will cut time on tedious and highly manual processes such as timesheets and expenses. While Marcel won't auto-generate timesheets, it can create a base one employees can adjust and approve. Marcel will also serve as a repository and usable archive of all Publicis Group's works and assets, making it easy for employees to seek inspiration, historical client work, and do research. The group has partnered with Cannes Lions to include its archives of 200,000 award-winning case studies spanning 2002 to 2018 as an added knowledge resource for its agencies. So you can see that they're just thinking of ways that you can use AI to make life easier. And as you put it, Neville, to take some of the tedious work that, I'm going to head over to the S drive on the shared server and peruse documents from previous work for my agency to simply asking Marcel to find work related to this or work that does that, and have Marcel predict based on everything that it knows from what's been fed to it, what's going to be useful and inspiring to you.
Yeah, I mean, that example, Marcel, that sounds very much like what IBM calls a personal digital assistant. I remember reading a lot about this when I was at IBM 2 years ago. And I've seen lots more about it since, because things have moved on in 2 years, which is you've got something, let's call it an AI, that sits in your device that takes care of your calendar, takes care of your email. It manages your network, recommends, this person's requesting a meeting with you. I think you should go, and it gives you the reasons why you should, because the person's connected to these other people that you want to be connected with. That kind of recommendation engine, if you will. So, these kinds of things are here and there appearing. I was reading a story just the other day about a piece of agricultural machinery. I've forgotten the name of the manufacturer, actually. But this, to me, is like the most prosaic piece of equipment you could possibly imagine. Yet, this is totally automated. What it is a machine that goes down rows and rows. Imagine one of these farms with humongous acreage of fields, all planted with crops in rows. And this machine goes down row by row, and it's got sensors that enable it to tell which are weeds and which are not. And it sprays a zap of insecticide on the weed to kill it. It does this 24/7, automated, all the time. And imagine human doing that kind of thing, which is what they would have had to do until now with the traditional way, either manually or with a tractor and a bit of stuff hit and miss and zap everything, in case you say this knows how to find the weeds. So you've got other examples in other industries where these are beginning to emerge, that these are not really artificial intelligence per se. They're automated systems.
Yet Internet of Things, right? They're connected devices.
Yeah, but there is an element of logic built in, intelligence in them. So I tend to avoid getting into the argument of, well, that's not really defining AI correctly. Whatever. We call it an AI because we think we understand what it could do for us. Is it machine learning, or that doesn't matter in the overall scheme of things. So these things are beginning to emerge. We see examples in self-driving cars, such as the Teslas that have hit the news recently with accidents, and we'll see more of that, no doubt, because again, nothing's perfect yet. So we're in the age of experimentation, where there's going to be disasters, and people's lives are going to be lost, and things aren't going to work out well before we can get to that utopia that everyone's hoping we're going to get to, which may be another 50 years away. So now we're focusing on PR. Now we've got this paper that will help us focus on the things that really matter in this development of AI in the workplace. So these examples are valid because you can almost apply some of this. Marcel's a terrific example that we could look at how to help people become more effective, more confident in what they're doing, and indeed acquire different skills than otherwise they would have done. That enables them to do things. Think of that headline from last year, Shel, at JP Morgan. And the 360,000 hours they've saved with lawyers that used to do all this stuff, and AI does it in like minutes, and all the money they save doing it. There's plenty of other examples like that. So will we see soon a headline that talks about such a PR agency had a jump in profits to the top of the league because they had an AI doing all this stuff for them? We will. Yeah. Who will it be? That's the interesting question.
By the way, nothing to do with AI, but we were talking about connected devices. I finally got my starter kit for the Philips Hue. So all our bedroom lights are now voice activated, and I have to admit, that we're able to make sure the lights are off and we're not spending that money while we're downstairs. And when we're ready to go upstairs to go to bed, I just tell the Echo device that's in the kitchen right there. I just say, turn on the bedroom lights, and when we get up there, I can turn off the main one and leave the bedside lamps on. And cool. Michelle dims hers to like 5% and uses it as a nightlight. So it's this stuff is great. I got to get more of it.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. There we are. Gonna make a time code note here for Dan's report, which I should be getting tomorrow. I did send Dan a copy of the rundown, so he knows what we're talking about. As you know, Apple dominates the podcast scene. NPR's podcasts in September 2017, 60% of NPR's podcasts were delivered through Apple's podcast player, the one that's native to the iPhone. That has dropped to 50% over the last couple of months, which seems to demonstrate an appetite for people to get podcasts from other places. If you have an iPhone, of course, the podcast app is there when you first turn it on. More Androids are in the marketplace by far than iPhones. And there is no native podcast app. Of course, you can go out and get Pocket Cast or something else that you want to use for podcast discovery and podcast playing. But it's certainly a lost opportunity for the podcasting world to have this kind of discovery with the population of people who carry Androids in their pockets. And by the way, speaking of artificial intelligence, Neville, you can find podcasts through the Google Assistant or the Google Home. Yep. Allow me to demonstrate. Hey, Google, play episode 138 of the For Immediate Release podcast.
All right, playing for immediate release episode number 138. It's 2018. Let's talk about blogs.
Episode number 138 of For Immediate Release. Hey, Google, stop. So, I mean, I think this is one of the reasons that you're going to see an explosion in podcast listening. In fact, we already are, because these voice-activated appliances just make it drop-dead easy to find them and play them without the rigmarole of tapping on your phone and adding it to the roster of podcasts that you listen to. But what we're seeing right now is publishers that produce podcasts, and that runs the gamut from NPR and Slate to the New York Times and MSNBC, are starting to pressure Google to basically make good on the promises that they have made about what they're going to do with podcasting. Right now, all of these publishers are relying pretty much on social media to help people discover the shows that they have available to them. Google has been in private talks with publishers about its commitment to become a podcast distribution force. I didn't know if you knew this, but they have a podcast product manager. His name is Zach Renaud-Wedin, and he appeared in a 5-part series from Pacific Content, which is a Canadian branded podcast company. That is, they make podcasts that are either from a company or sponsored by a company. There are podcasts, like there's one on getting good sleep that is sponsored by Sleep Number.
They had a deep analysis of the Google offering actually on their blog in a series of blog posts.
Yeah. Anyway, in that series, he described a podcast-focused player that would be native to Android, as well as about their vision to make podcasts available through Google Search. Now, right now, you can do that on an Android device. You can search for a podcast. In addition to finding it, it'll give you episodes where you can play snippets from them to see if you are interested. And then if you tap through, it actually gives you the RSS feed from that show. But it's not available on the desktop search. It's not available if you search the iPhone Google app. So not much has happened since they announced these initiatives. And, one podcast publisher, VaynerMedia, Gary Vaynerchuk's company, accused them of holding everyone back. And another publisher said, Google has a podcast beast just sitting there. So there's a window open for Google, since Apple really hasn't been able to create a scalable advertising solution. And of course, advertising is in Google's DNA. There was one guy, Dylan Hecklaw, director of product management at Jelly, Jelli, which is a programmatic ads company. He said he wouldn't be surprised if once Google got their podcast distribution act together, you wouldn't see a podcast ad network follow right in its footsteps. Podcasting is continuing to surge. I don't know if you heard this, but Amy Schumer just signed a $1 million deal with Spotify to do a podcast, a show on pop culture, politics, and the world of stand-up comedy, which she is going to produce and host. So Spotify is really making some moves in podcasting. And also saw a post from Jonathan Mast. I don't know if you remember Jonathan, but he saw me speak, I think, in 2005 at a Reagan conference on podcasting. So that would have been within months of you and I starting FIR. And he and a colleague of his, Aidan Gunby, started a show internally at the company where he worked. And they did that for quite a long time. And he thinks that internal podcasting continues to make a lot of sense. In fact, more sense than it did in 2005, since every employee now carries a podcast media player in their pocket.
Right.
He says it's also easier to distribute these days. And if you internally are using a product like Dynamic Signal or Social Chorus, it's very easy to distribute an internal podcast as just a post in that app. But for external podcasting, once Google gets seriously into this game, I think you're going to see a lot of companies that have been holding back or just not interested take the plunge, because you're going to see a surge in podcast discovery, in podcast subscriptions, and brands are going to feel like, okay, this is a serious medium now with all of these new listeners coming into the field, that they're going to feel compelled to develop entries in the space.
That's interesting. So why do you think Apple's not stepping up on this?
I think that, Apple kind of invented, obviously they didn't invent podcasting, but when, what was it, in mid 2005 or 2006, they came out with the iTunes store with the podcast directory. Right. They kind of owned it, and they still do. And if I were to guess, I don't have any inside knowledge, no longer know anybody who works at Apple, but my guess would be that they're resting on their laurels, that they think they own this space already, and there's just not that much to do. I mean, look how long it took them to update their podcast app, which at one point was terrible, and iTunes on the desktop continues to be pretty awful.
Yeah, it does.
But it's the default tool that so many people use, that they figure that they own it, and it's for somebody else to step up and challenge them. But they're not much of an advertiser. They are a hardware product company, and their focus seems to be more around entertainment, which you would think would include podcasting. But I think they just figured that they're already there, and it's up to somebody else to challenge.
I mean, I think it would be really great to see, this truly taking off, because particularly here in the UK, it never has here in the UK. I did see a report recently on the latest, I'm not sure it was the latest, but recent analytics of listenership of radio in the UK, and podcasting or time shifted audio is growing in use in consumption in the UK, but it tends to be mainstream media programs that are now available as recordings, rather than the kind of stuff produced internally in an organization or by a company that isn't done in a studio with rich production values added to it. So the kind of casual type of content still hasn't really moved any further from what I can see. I think it'd be great if it did. So maybe it will need someone like Google to get cracking with this, to make this so-called renaissance that I keep hearing a lot about actually happen, certainly here in the UK.
There's some movement in the UK. I just found a TechCrunch article that says the BBC will run its first podcast ads powered by Acast.
Yeah, they're doing a lot of experimentation in the labs area. And so I guess this is part of that. But it's great to see that movement, I must admit. So, podcasting is most of the podcasts I listen to, I look for content on some topics that I don't find in the UK, and there's usually an American version of it. Yeah. So,
and I do think you're going to see, as the voice appliances, the smart speakers, gain more adoption, podcasting will get an uptick from that too. And I have found it interesting as I look at the data on who's buying these smart speakers. The early adopters are not nerds, right? The early adopters are families, because there's something in it for them. So that's another reason I think we're going to see this continue to build. But definitely when Google gets a native app on the Android, I think that's going to be like when the AOLers all discovered the net.
Yeah.
A flood of people into the podcasting space.
I think you're right. Okay,
so we have to make a time code note here for Social Chorus.
Yeah.
We're right at the 1 hour mark.
Yeah.
So pretty good shape.
Yep.
Okay.
Right. So we'll now talk a bit more about Facebook, but in a slightly different context, Google and Facebook. So we know that as a result of the data issues surrounding Cambridge Analytica and the kerfuffle that arose because of that, the furore, the outrage, all that happened. Facebook then became far more proactive in helping us all understand what data they held on us, how we could get at it, how we could decide what we shared and what we didn't share with them. I felt, as I still do, in fact, it's still too opaque of what exactly Facebook holds about you and how you can get access to it. So that's kind of, what do I do about it? Do I then decide I don't want to be on Facebook anymore? No, I'm still there, but I'm not happy with that situation, I have to admit. So then I read this piece in the New York Times the other day about what Google's doing. And what they're doing is not brand new. This has been around for a while. Google Takeout, it's known as. And I remember hearing about this way back in 2010, if not before. But it's now even easier to get at the data. And the journalist Brian Chen wrote this piece just under a week ago, actually, on his experience in what he encountered when he obtained the data from Google. And as he says in the headline of his piece, Google's file on me was huge. Here's why it wasn't as creepy as my Facebook data. Good headline, I thought. So it prompted me. I mean, we'll have a link to this piece in the show notes. I mean, it's worth a read. He goes into some detail explaining exactly what Google Takeout is, how it works, how you get yours, and his own perceptions and impressions and thoughts about what he found in his own data file. So it prompted me to do the same as he did. So I did that. I requested a download of my file from Google. That was quite a simple process to organize that. Once you get to the web page, it's easy to find it in your Google account. And so I requested it. I got an email from Google, and this is where my eyes opened a bit, Shel, to be honest, because the email I had from Google acknowledging my request was most interesting. It included this text. I'll read this out in its entirety. It's quite a your account, your data headline. That's a subject line. The Google Data Archive you started on May the 18th, 2018 is ready. It contains your +1s, bookmarks, Classroom, Cloud Print, G Suite Marketplace, Google My Business, Google Pay Send, Google Pay, Rewards, gift cards and offers, Google Play Music, Hands-Free, Hangouts, Hangouts on Air, Home App, Input Tools, Keep, Maps, Your Places, My Maps, News, Posts on Google, Profile, Reminders, Saved, Search Contributions, Street View, Tasks, Voice, Blogger, Calendar, Chrome, Fit, Google Photos, Groups, Mail, Maps, My Activity, Contacts, Drive, Google Help Communities, Google Play Books, Google Plus Circles, Google Plus Communities, Google Plus Stream, Location History, and YouTube Data. It will be available to you to download until May the 26th, 2018. Well, I've downloaded it all. 75 gigabytes of stuff. So I guess it includes...
You need to buy a separate drive.
Well, no, I've got a terabyte in my Google Drive. So, it's probably got all the Google Photos. Bloggers mentioned there. And that must include when I had Blogger back in 2002. All
Was
that
Buzz in there? The old failed Google.
No, they deleted all of that when they changed.
Okay.
You remember? Yeah, they deleted it all. So I was gobsmacked when I read all of this, and then I went back to the journalist article to see a bit more about his experience of what he found. So nothing revelationary in it. His experience, he had a very small file by comparison. And I've seen a couple of people talking on Facebook of all places about what they found in their Google file. And some people saying, well, I had a huge amount of data at 12 gigs. So I'm thinking 75 gigs I've got in there, according to Google. They had to split it down into small files because the maximum was, I've forgotten what it was now, but I ended up with 5 files in total that were big. Took a while to download, although actually 28 megabytes per second download speed I've got on my broadband. Reminded me back in the day of modems at 26K, I think, or something. That was a lot. So anyway, I haven't got to it yet, but I'm going to. But it has got me thinking in particular about the huge difference between Facebook and Google and how they've approached this. I have no idea of the totality of what Facebook has. Do I trust Google to think, is this a totality of what they've got? They said, in fact, on 2 of the items there, they don't have complete data, but they explained why not. and they explained what data they couldn't find and ensure it belonged to me and not someone else. So I thought, okay, what do I do with that knowledge? I'm not sure actually, but the disclosure of what was there was impressive compared to what Facebook has done. And I don't believe Facebook's going to change that anytime soon. I mean, to my mind, Shel, they're touting themselves as like, aren't we cool? We're making all this amazing stuff available to you, lucky people. We're being transparent and very proactive. It's bullshit, frankly, in my book, compared to what Google's doing. And it impressed me a lot. And reading this piece by Brian Chen, it's good. He talks about how he's able to delete what he calls, if he finds any objectionable data in his archive, he's able to delete it. He purges things like the ad history. You can do that with Facebook too, but it's not clear, are you purging everything? And indeed, have they disclosed everything to you? You've got that niggling doubt by comparison. So in contrast, this seems to be Google is offering you a lot more trustworthiness than Facebook has demonstrated so far. Now, what does that actually mean? I'm not quite sure, to be honest, because does it mean that we should all leave Facebook? No, I don't think it means that. It means that, the people you're dealing with. And indeed, as Brian Chen concludes, if you're still not happy with this, probably the only thing you could do is cease to use the web entirely, and that's not practical for almost anyone these days. So you probably have to live with it and not use them. I mean, I've changed my behavior on Facebook. I haven't changed much on Google Plus. On Google, I'm not sure whether I will, but Facebook, I don't do any of the things I was doing, even casually. The odd quiz here and there, the little test someone says, hey, well, what was your first experience in this, that, the other? I just do not do any of those things at all. So I would say that anyone listening to this, go get your data from Google. Just take a look and see what Google has about you. That will help you understand what your behavior is, the scope and scale of what you are online and where that is, and what Google knows about you. That's not a bad thing to know all of that yourself even, and actually get hold of that data so you can see what you might need to change going forward from this point. So it's worth doing.
Yep. A couple thoughts on this. First of all, I think what it does is it reassures people who are not going to download their data. Just knowing that it's available and hearing that people are doing it make them feel better. Yeah. That transparency is going to pay off for Google more than it will for Facebook. I think most people ultimately don't care. I think I saw 75% of Facebook users were blissfully unaware of the entire Google Cambridge Analytica story. And, people are kind of shrugging it off. I have always maintained that I couldn't care less what Facebook or Google know about me, mainly because, and this might be hubris on my part, but I like to think I'm savvy enough about how that data is used that I can tell when there's an effort to manipulate. And frankly, I like the targeted advertising. I don't like it as much as I think I will in a few years. The main thing I want to stop is getting pitched stuff that I just bought, as opposed to stuff that they can intuit that I'm interested in. But when I find a link to a concert that's coming up near me by an artist I like that I hadn't heard was going to be performing, I really appreciate that kind of thing. The other thing that comes to mind is that 75 gigs that you downloaded, that's all zip files, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so you can only imagine how much data that's going to be when it's unzipped.
Absolutely.
And it's just a treasure trove of what you've done and what they know about you. What it doesn't tell you is what they do with that data.
No, I realize that's okay. There's nothing I can do about that. But this will tell me things that maybe I didn't know that I was doing that I can change, maybe. So, for instance, Brian Chen talks about in his data, he's got a subfolder in one of the files labeled Android. And that contains a detailed history of the Android apps he has opened over the past 3 years on his Android device. So that level of detail.
That's probably 72 of the 75 gigs.
Yeah, I think I'm sure you're right. Most people don't really care about this. I do. And I think everyone ought to, be aware of what's out there about you. Right. I mean, I can remember about 7 years ago, it probably is about then, when I discovered almost by accident, because I never really kept track of it or even thought about it, all these new social networks and things I signed up for that Google knew about. And they used to publish on your profile page a list of every single social network Google knew about that you were a member of. This thing I had, that if I printed out my profile, right, the profile would take up half a page, but I get a 6-page printout because a column of it would go across 5 more pages of all the places I signed up for. And this, I suspect, is going to be a little bit like this if it includes stuff like that. So it may be, I mean, you may be right, Shel, that at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. It's there. There's not much you can do about it. Well, actually, there is something you can do about it, which is maybe change some of your behaviors going forward in this age we are, where fake news is the norm, and you cannot trust. I mean, who can you trust to safeguard your data? So privacy of data is increasingly something many more of us are concerned about, and we sense now we can do something about this. There are actions being taken by groups, including the Internet Society, I would add, that advocate for enabling greater transparency in how data is being used. So there's a lot of pressure going on constantly to leaders of countries and others who can influence change in this area. And I think I see that stepping up quite hugely. So this is the time, really, that there is so much out there that we need to have a greater sense of who's got our data. Hence GDPR is so important. But, you know, you're right at the end of the day that who's really going to go through all this stuff? And when you do, then what?
Right.
Are you suddenly going to have sleepless nights from that point on? Maybe you are. So maybe it's best not to open Pandora's box, you know. So, but I think it helps to understand your footprint, and that's how I'm seeing it. So I will go through my 75 gigs worth of zip files that will expand out to about a petabyte probably, and I'll find, oh, I got all my Google photos in there. Great, I've got them all now. That's fantastic. And my blogger posts from 2002. Oh, great fun. But seeing things like how many apps I've opened on my phone. I mean, blimey, do they track that? Well, yeah, they do. I already knew one thing, which did concern me a bit a few years back when I learned it. There's a website you could go to at that time. I'm not sure it's still there. That showed the history of your location that Google knew about when you were going around with your phone. If it was location enabled, it would plot your movements on a map. And that to me was a bit creepy because it.
Well, that was the one that people were using to figure out that you were on vacation nowhere near your home and they could go burgle it, right? Yeah.
So I thought it's a bit, to me, that was an example of what people are asking Facebook now. Why are you keeping that data? Stuff like that. So this could help you look at some of the things that Google has on you that might make you think, so why are you doing this? And they provide a mechanism by which you can ask them questions about your data. So I hope they're well staffed with that. Maybe they've got an AI to deal with it. I don't know. But this to me is valuable stuff that's worth looking at.
Yep. And I expect in June that you'll give us a report on what you've discovered as you've gone through the data. And listeners, if any of you follow Neville's lead and download all that data and take a look, be interested to see if you find anything that causes you great concern. So let's talk about demographics. I'm always interested in demographics and the impact that has on how you communicate with a group of people. And I was reading a piece that there was a data point that I just wasn't expecting to see. This is all regarding Generation Z. This is the generation that follows the millennials born between the mid-1990s and the early 2000s. They currently make up 25% of the population, which doesn't surprise me. I knew about that. They are larger.
That's in the US, right?
I don't know. Yeah. I would assume that's global. Everybody born from the mid-90s to the early 2000s globally would. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But I know that it's a larger demographic group than millennials. It's a larger demographic group than boomers. The data point that surprised me is that it will account for 40% of all consumers by 2020. And I always hear by 2020. I've been hearing that for a long time, and it always sounded like the distant future. And
2 years away.
It's right. It's not even
no,
a year and a half away.
Yeah.
So this is a study from a nonprofit consultancy. I've never heard of it, I have to confess, called Do Something Strategic. Do something is one word. So the report is called Dollars and Change. Young people tap brands as agents of social change. And what it shows is that Gen Z is bypassing the political system and focusing on consumerism as a channel for change. Now, I've been talking about the values-driven marketplace and the need for brands to step up. We've talked about this in the context of the Edelman Trust Barometer. The 2017 Trust Barometer found 75% of people think that companies need to use their resources to effect social change and promote social justice in addition to just making money. The 2018 Trust Barometer reinforced that with its belief that 60% of CEOs are in it just for the money. And there was some other data points there. But this was all had to be taken as part of the larger picture that with millennials, there was still a certain amount of interest and engagement in the political system. And Gen Z seems to be starkly different in that regard. They are bypassing, as the report says, the political system and really turning their attention to consumerism as a way to create change. 76% of Gen Z has purchased or is open to purchasing a brand or product to support the issues the brand stands for. More than 67%, and I think this is more alarming to a lot of companies, have stopped purchasing or would consider stop purchasing if the company stood for something or behaved in a way out of sync with their values. 25% say they always or often buy a product or service based solely on what that organization believes or what its values are, and they want to support them. And by the way, people of color do this even more frequently than the mass population of Gen Zers. But only 32% of Generation Z has attended a political event or protest or even contacted an elected representative. Another interesting thing that came out of this study, Gen Z tends to be characterized as a group of really staunch liberals, but half label themselves as moderates and half identify as either independent or unaffiliated. And much of, I didn't see the numbers here, but it did say much or most of the voting age Gen Zers haven't voted. They're voting with their pocketbooks and not in the voting booth. Basically, they're expecting brands to use their own platforms for good and to pick up where politicians and politics may have let them down. This, according to Meredith Ferguson, who is managing director of the Do Something Strategic. 49% of survey respondents said it was important for a company or brand to have social change initiatives that consumers can become a part of, which makes me think of Patagonia with the page they have where you can get engaged with their sustainability efforts. They've also proposed a new brand ethos hierarchy. So, think about Maslow's hierarchy, the pyramid. At the lowest level, what they say is all are welcome in our brand. The second level says we care. The third level says caring is integral to our story. The fourth level says engaging for direct impact is what we are doing. And the pinnacle, at the top of the pyramid, our company lives its purpose. They also point out in the study that you can't fake this. Gen Zers' bullshit detectors are finely tuned, according to Ferguson. Brands that act opportunistically or don't walk the talk will be targeted, while those that do nothing will be left out or called out, which that's just not a smart business strategy, she says. I had to make a presentation the day before yesterday. I've been taking this 12-part leadership class at work. It's from a group called the Lighthouse Institute that I guess has a pretty good reputation. And Tim Rhodes, the guy who was running it, was very good. I've been through these leadership training classes before, and usually they're just eye-rollingly stupid and ridiculously high level and not applicable to the real world. This one was very, very good, very tactical, very ground level in terms of its application. But we all had to make a presentation at the end of the course. And what I wanted to do was connect what we talked about in the class. We spent like 3 sessions dealing just with trust and building trust and what the cost of not having trust is. This is individual trust with your team, right? With your peers. And what I wanted to do was connect the dots between that and the trust barometer. And it was really easy to do, right? Because if you remember, the trust barometer still finds employees are more credible spokespeople than CEOs. I made this point while the CEO was sitting in the room. He came in for the presentations. That was interesting. But if we can build trust in the organization, it can build trust outside. We know that the whole concept of what we're hearing about Gen Zs as consumers also applies to them as candidates. When you're recruiting, it applies to them as employees when you're trying to retain your top performers and reduce the amount of turnover. So the connection, I think, is pretty clear, even in B2B, even in organization. I mean, nobody is going to decide that they're going to build, a $400 million commercial structure because we had great social media or because we engaged well on the issue of sustainability or corporate social responsibility. But it can have a tremendous impact on who's going to come work for us and who's going to stay with us, which is challenging in the current environment with high levels of employment. So I think this study reinforces the idea that brands and CEOs really do need to step out of the shadows and take positions, especially if you're a B2C company where it's going to be purchase decisions. But regardless, even in the investment world, as Gen Z becomes 40% of the consuming public and also surges into the workforce, you really are, as an organization, going to have to step up and not just tick off the boxes on the corporate social responsibility compliance sheet anymore. You really are going to have to invest time in a purpose, time and money.
Yeah. No pain, no gain, as they say. I mean, I think this survey is only the US, Shel, because
the survey is,
the report talking about all these percentages and the findings from the result. It is in the US. There's some elements of it though that I would be very surprised if it doesn't apply in some other countries. I mean, I've seen some commentary talking about this particular age range and how different they are in their aspirations and things like that. Not seen the level of detail as this, mind you. But it's something that we were talking earlier, that I hear people talking a lot about millennials still, whereas they should be talking about this generation.
So 15 minutes ago.
Yeah, so 15 minutes ago. I mean, I hear people talking about, millennials entering the workforce. Yeah, they were doing that in 2010, So there are major differences. I remember a blog post I wrote in April last year that contrasted the millennials with this current generation, based on research from people like Mary Meeker with her Internet Trends report. She had a terrific section in 2016 and 2017 on this, the differences between these two generations as it relates to technology in particular. So the more we can understand, obviously the better. But I don't see no. I mean, I'd not heard of this report, so it's good to have this additional information. So it's food for thought to dwell on there, I think. So it's a good one.
And that will bring us to the end of episode 139 of For Immediate Release and the June installment of the Hobson and Holtz Report. I do want to remind everybody that next week, while I am in Montreal, soaking in information from sessions at the IABC World Conference, Dan will be hosting For Immediate Release. Dan York, our tech correspondent. He's done it before, and he always does a really good job, brings a different flavor to the show. Neville, as always, I look forward to these chats. When we did them every week, it was routine. Now that it's one a month, it's something that I'm waiting for with great anticipation. So I'm very grateful for the time.
Well, me too. It's good to continue what we started in 2005 in a slightly different format.
Yep.
It's great. So yeah, like I'm with you. I enjoy doing this too.
As always, I'm going to offer you the opportunity to pitch something and then let people know where they can find you online. And I suspect you're going to pitch the Small Data Forum podcast, right?
Amazing intuition there. This is
the AI allowed me to predict.
So this is the podcast, the other podcast that I co-present with Thomas Sturkler and Sam Knowles, all of us here in the UK, the Small Data Forum podcast that takes big data as its theme, its core focus around which we construct narratives and commentary that brings the different perspectives of Sam, Thomas, and myself to them. And it's a terrific conversation we have once a month. So we did the latest episode early in May that looked at well, again, wide range. We always call them wide range discussion, but that looked at ethics, breaches of trust, at Facebook in them, in the usual suspects we talked about. So each of those shows is around 3/4 of an hour. So if you have time, check it out. smalldataforum.com is where you will find it. And to the second part of the pitch, Shel, you can find me on Twitter, is the place I'm at. Mostly Jangles is where I am. But if you want to look at my blog and see some stuff that I've not written for a while, it's nevillehobson.com.
And I have to tell you, I think I told you a couple months ago, I've started listening regularly to the Small Data Forum. But now that big data is one of the 4 strategic initiatives at my company, I'm paying even more attention and passing the link around to some other people. So
that's good to know. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. I want to thank Sally and Clarence for sticking with us.
Yeah. Definitely.
We're down to one, so Sally or Clarence dropped off, but that was just a minute ago. They were both with us for the entire 90 minutes.
That's nice.
And I want to invite listeners to send comments to fircomments@gmail.com. I'll read them on the air. You can attach up to a 3-minute audio file. If you want us to play it, we will. Record a comment directly from the FIR website. Over on the right-hand side of the page, you'll see a tab. You just tap that or click that and record. I think you get 90 seconds there. So if you want the full 3 minutes, you'll have to do 2 of those. I think Chris Gallagher did that once. I pieced together 2 files that she recorded. You can leave a comment directly on the blog for this podcast in the comment section for the show notes. Or share your thoughts over on the FIR community on Facebook. And I wonder if that's data that you can get from Facebook, the posts that you have made to pages and groups. And of course, if you are inclined to do so, I would be very grateful if you'd leave a review on iTunes. You can't do it on Google yet, but maybe one of these days. Or Pocket Casts, or wherever you find and listen to your podcasts. And with that, until Dan is with you next week, that will be a 30 for immediate release. So you can stop your audio recording.
I'll do that right.
Although we're still broadcasting live on YouTube. So
yep, I've just done it. It's now saving it. Okay.
Great. So you'll upload that to Dropbox for me?
Yes, I will.
Great.
I'll do that tonight, my time. So are you publishing on Monday as usual?
Yeah, Monday's Memorial Day here, so I don't have to go to work. I'm going to produce it tomorrow and have everything up and ready to go, and I'll have it automatically posted at like 4 a.m. my time. So,
okay, I'll post it Monday because it's a public holiday here as well. Monday, spring bank holiday, so I'll have time to do that on Monday. So I'll probably get it up at lunchtime-ish my time.
That'll work.
Good. Yeah. That was great. So
yes.
Have a good weekend. Enjoy the holiday.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm other than doing the FIR promotion, which should take about 20 minutes. I'm not working. I'm going to make it a holiday.
Me too.
Yep. Okay.
Say hi to Michelle.
And you to Laura.
I will. And I'll talk to you, if not before, in about a month's time.
Yeah, we have that scheduled, don't we?
That's a good point. I'm going to have a quick look. I'm not sure we do. I'm not sure we do. Hang on a sec.
Look here. June.
So the YouTube recording for this one, are you going to have it up there? Or
yeah, I'm going to go ahead and post it on the FIR YouTube channel.
Perfect.
And no, we have not scheduled for June. So
we should do that.
23rd or 24th?
23rd's good. Saturday. Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that works for you?
Yes.
So that's okay. Record FIR. Shel. Oops.
Same time. Same bat time. Same bat channel.
Yeah. Record FIR with Shel. So 5 o'clock, 1700 to 1900. Saturday, the 23rd of June. Don't think anything's happening that day. It's not in my main calendar. So, yep, looks good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. Enjoy your holiday.
Thanks a lot, Shel. I'll talk to you then. What do I do? I just
If
hang
not
up on the
sooner.
red.
No,
Yeah,
I'll stop the broadcast. That'll take care of it. All right.
All right. Have a good weekend.
Talk to you soon.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.